text her and I haven't got her response. So we'll just...
Make sure you're not flashing.
Okay, it being 6 o'clock, I will declare the January meeting of the Shire of Capel Council open. We wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we are meeting on, the Nullakala Budja and Southwest Budjara people. We wish to acknowledge and respect their continuing connection to the land, waters and community. We pay our respects to all members of the Aboriginal communities and their cultures, and to elders past, present and emerging. Record of attendance, we have an apology from Councillor Andrew. That's dealt with item number 5. Response to previous questions taken on notice, there are none. Public question time, I have some here. Mr. Brian Hasty of Stratham.
Thanks, Chair. Good evening, Shire councillors and people in the gallery. Just to first off, on question 2, can you change the word was to if? Thank you. Yeah, I am Brian Hasty from Stratham, I better say that. I refer to item 15.1 of the Capel Shire's December agenda, where an amount of $17,883.25 was paid to the Department of Local Government, Sport and Culture Industries in November by electronic funds, transfer number EFT 37995, paid on the 24th of November 2021. Who is responsible for this for accumulating this large cost to the local standards panel?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Hasty. Costs are accrued per claimant lodged to the local government standards panel, i.e. from the sitting to the hearing to the complaint through to the writing decision and any sanction. The Shire then receives the total account for the financial year, which was shown as EFT 37995. Confidentiality provisions under section 5.123 of the Local Government Act 1995 prevent disclosure of information unless a complaint by the state, prevent disclosure of information about a complaint unless the State Administrative Tribunal or the Standards Panel have made a finding in relation to the complaint. Information relating to findings of a minor breach can be found on the register for certain complaints of a minor breach on the Shire's website. The responsibility for accumulating standards panel costs that are not found on the register on certain complaints of minor breach cannot be discussed due to the confidentiality provisions.
Oh yeah, I can understand that. Just for clarification, I'm going to ask question 2, even though you've answered the question in the negative to my question. If the person responsible for the amount of money being paid was a previous president, will the council be seeking restitution from him?
That question's probably a bit out of order, Mr. Hasty.
Okay, all right. We'll call that one a delete. Well, I'll delete that question altogether and accept that it was out of order. And that's all I've got. We're not going to ask question 3.
Thank you, Mr. Hasty.
Okay.
Mr. Mike Norton of Capel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and councillors. My question, I guess, is to the CEO. The CEO has recommended to the council a 10 by 10 year lease arrangement to Walser, subject to 7 conditions. None of the 7 conditions appear in the lease agreement, which doesn't mention the buoyant up sale yards at all. It's a fairly mundane document that's obviously just a clear lift-off from a solicitor's website and doesn't talk about sale yards at all, so, which is a little bit of a concern. So, which then leads into all sale yards in Australia are subject to the Australian Animal Welfare Standards and Guidelines. Livestock at sale yards and depots and operate in WA under the State Animal Welfare Act by the Minister for Agriculture. That agreement is a national document. It's been put in place in many years. It was tacked on to the transport standards and guidelines. So, I guess the question is, if the current site doesn't comply with national guidelines, why we continue to have a sale yards in that locality. The guidelines clearly state sale yards should not operate in gazetted town sites, plus a number of other actions in the guidelines could not be carried out on the current sale yard site, regardless of the capital expenditure into the future. And I guess the question to the CEO is, how does the Capel Shire justify the above recommendations to council when the current buoyant up sale yard site is not compliant with the Australian animal welfare standards, and when the current buoyant up sale yard site is not compliant with other animal welfare acts and other acts? We're a little bit perplexed, I guess, Mr. Chairman, in relation to the recommendation, as it's covered by that.
Thank you, Mr. Norton, for the question. I'll be declaring an interest in that matter later on in the meeting. So to answer your question, I'll defer to the Deputy President.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Norton. Questions are obviously to council, but I could ask the CEO perhaps if I do have a response for you as well, but unless the CEO would like to make that response, otherwise I can give the response. Yep. Yeah, so the draft lease agreement only relates to the land vested in the Shire, which is being Crown Reserve 27193 and 27194. The draft lease requires the lessee to comply with statutory obligations under Clause 17, negating the need to include entire statutory guidelines. While the Shire is not the responsible authority for ensuring compliance with the Australian Animal Welfare Standards and Guidelines or the Animal Welfare Act 2002, compliance monitoring will be undertaken in partnership with relevant state and federal agencies. And I think just adding to that as well, in discussion to your comments about location and relocation, obviously I think that there's a recommendation that the CEO has put before council tonight for council to make a decision. And I think you'll note in point 5 that there is obviously a recommendation to council to consider what the future of that site looks like. And obviously it's up to council to make a decision tonight.
Thank you. No other comments? Yeah, we're on to the second question now. Point 2 of the recommendations which refers to the 7 management orders with which you referred to. The order goes on to say that it will be carried out to the satisfaction of the Shire officers. The question is, the livestock industry should have, could have little confidence in the Shire officers' ability to be across all the details relating to the 7 management orders placed on the lease agreement, plus having good knowledge of the Australian Animal Welfare and Standards Guideline, which has some very detailed document procedures which apply to livestock sale yards. And as, you know, whilst I've got the greatest faith in a lot of your employees, but this is a very specialised area in the construction and building of sale yards to comply with a whole lot of national standards and guidelines. And it's just not on animal welfare; it's on environment, it's on transport, it's on effluent management. If you read the document very closely, it's a fairly detailed document, and it's for anybody to implement that. They need some fairly good knowledge, which doesn't come easily or quickly. So I guess the question is, how can this be done to give livestock producers and confidence that our interests will be protected, and certainly the constituents of the Boynup town site, because we believe the current sale yard is holding back the development of the Boynup town site.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Norton, for your second question. I think there's 2 points to this. Firstly, obviously the role of managing and ordering compliance with the relatory statutory law on the site is the responsibility of the state and federal agency. The role of the Shire is to continue working with stakeholders, including the lessees, relevant government agencies and industry, to ensure compliance and to provide the best outcome for the community. The officer's recommendation provides further negotiation of a capital upgrade plan and management plan, including but not limited to the 7 matters that are detailed in recommendation 2, and these documents and appendices to the final lease agreement. I think the second important point, of course, is accordingly, a default on these 7 matters may cause a default on the lease, and that's what's being proposed tonight within this recommendation. The public submissions received by the Shire from November 2021 to the 5th of January 2022 will also be used to inform the development of these capital upgrade and management plans.
Thank you. The only comment there, you know, this issue has been ongoing for the last 15 or 20 years, and I think that site has reached its use-by date to invest more capital on infrastructure that's just not compliant. It's just a waste of money, and the quicker we all collectively try and move towards a new greenfield site, the better off the council and the livestock producers and the people of Boynup are going to be, and just not get snowed under by a couple of livestock companies. Anyhow, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Norton. We'll take those comments, and of course, as I mentioned, point 5 as well, I think could provide a bit of an answer to that comment and question, and we'll see how that progresses tonight. Thank you.
Mr. Charles Pace of Peppermint Grove Beach.
Thank you, President, CEO, councillors, ladies and gentlemen. Just got to, excuse me. Yep. The question comes in 2 parts, I suppose, but I just wanted to ask the deck for the proposed applicant 14.1 at 6 Winter Court, Peppermint Grove Beach. The deck is 6 metres from the house, narrowing to 4 metres. It does not appear this is taken into consideration as it reduces to the visual impact to number 8 next door. We believe the reduced setback back is in compliance with the codes being 3.8 metres at the centre of the deck that allows a reduced setback measurement as it measures 3.750 millimetres. Where and how did the planner determine the setback is not clear. The street setback does not physically relate to our property, as there is 23.4 metres of land belonging to other authorities from the street boundary to the closest point at the curb that cannot be built on. There is no street impact, as this land is heavily vegetated with trees and shrubs and not in our control. Due to the heavily vegetation, no one can park on the street verge or see our property from the street having no street impact. We seek a variation on the setback taking into consideration from the street rather than the front boundary, considering a verge at 3 metres from the curb. There would be a 20.3 metre setback from the verge to the closest point of the proposed deck. Can we have an explanation and apply a variation considering all of the mentioned points?
Thank you, Mr. Pace, for the question, and I apologise. I'll just ask the public if they could just ensure their phones are on silent for the duration of the meeting. I apologise for that, and I'll defer to the Chief Executive Officer to answer your question.
Thanks, President.
Through you, Shire President, thank you for the question, Mr. Pace. The proposed, I'll try and address the points raised in your question in sequence. The proposed narrowing of the deck towards the front of the property does not mitigate the overall bulk of the structure and visual impact, including the 6.271 high ridge height. The primary street setback is measured to the primary street boundary, i.e. in this case the front boundary of your property, and does not comply. An R12.5 zoning requires 7.5 primary street setback, which may be reduced, which is what you refer to as a variation, by 50%, which is to 3.75 metres, as per the relevant section of the R codes. The application submitted is seeking a reduced setback greater than the 50%, being 2.498 metres, and as we talked about on the phone today, you're definitely interpreting the R codes and as we agreed, your interpretation of the R codes in terms of the possible setback variations are different than the assessment of officers, hence the different recommendation from councillors, to councillors. Due to the heavy reduced primary street setback and significant height of the proposed structure, significant streetscape impact would be expected. As I also, although this impact is partially mitigated by the vegetation within the verge, it is within the verge and it cannot be guaranteed to remain there. If that vegetation was removed from the verge, the proposal would have a significant impact, given that there's no significant vegetation on your property that would remain. The proposed reduced primary street setback does not meet other design principles of Part 512 stipulated in the R codes, which is covered in the officer's report.
Thank you. Can I just add to that, from the street impact, there are a lot of modern houses, recent houses that are built that you don't see the front entrance or the front door. So here that would apply.
Through you, Shire President, I understand your point that you're making, Mr. Pace. It doesn't change, I guess, the fact that we're assessing the proposed structure, which is the deck and awning, and that's what's being assessed as a significant visual impact of taking into account the lack of vegetation on your property, not the verge.
Thank you. I'll go on to question 2, if I may.
Yep.
We explained to the planner and submitted in writing, we will not be building over the septic tanks. The septic tanks area that we discovered by poking the ground is set back from the northern side of the deck, at the house being 3 metres, with the front distance from the septic tank being approximately 1.5 metres. No building or solid path will be built over. Built facing towards each other at approximately 35 degrees. We both look into each other's vision according to the R codes. Our application complies, as the proposed deck from the street set proposed deck would look into the rear of number 8. Can we have an explanation and apply a variation considering all of the mentioned points? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pace, for the question. I'll ask the CEO to provide a comment on that one.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pace. Through you, Shire President. The issue of the location of the septic system has not been raised as a reason for recommending refusal. The septic location was mentioned within the report for context, and to highlight that this was discussed and information provided to you as the applicant regarding setback requirements to the septic tanks. As a possible issue, if and when the proposal was to go to a building permit stage and the structure could not meet the requirements discussed. The use of the proposed structure as a carport, as illustrated in the proposed submitted plans, may be an issue if a vehicle was to traverse over the septic system. As per Part 541 of the R Codes, overlooking any part of any other residential property behind its street setback line is a variation that must be addressed through screening or justified by meeting the design principles. The submitted proposal before Council does not propose any screening and has not been assessed as being consistent with the design principles. And again, as we discussed on the phone this afternoon, any request for a variation other than what's provided in legislation would need to be part of a resubmitted proposal and assessed separately on its individual detail and compliance.
Thank you. Thanks, councillors. Tom.
Thank you, Mr. Pace.
Thank you.
Are there any further public questions? Yes, please, if you could state your name and locality.
I'm Melvin Hetner, and I'm from the farm at Coachen up in Katanning in Brunswick. I've submitted submissions for the Boyne Up Style Yards. My concern would be that the style yards do serve a considerably wide area of the agricultural area, right out to the rabbit-proof fence, where beef cattle do come in, and beef cattle do come in from Esperance. And I just think you need to keep all those factors in mind. Whilst there are some people that think that the cattle that come in from around the Boyne Up or Capel area or somewhere around that area, there's probably a far wider ranging number of cattle do come in from further afield. The holding pens at the style yards in the winter time this year, most of them have had 6 inches or 3 inches, 4 inches of water over it this winter. So, and I don't consider that's quite good for animal welfare. Some pens where you can get a higher pen with sand in, perhaps you can get a bit drier.
Apologies, are you coming to a question or?
Yeah, well, I'm just making those points.
Sure. Okay.
And I would like the Shire in the style yards position to consider all that aspect, that the welfare is the number one thing. That's my point.
Sure,
Particularly for cattle that are travelling long distances.
Sure.
All right?
I'll defer that question to the Deputy President to handle.
Okay.
Thank you, Melvin. It's good to see you as well.
Yeah, good to see you
Mate,
too.
I will. Well, I think
And-
we'll take that as a comment. But obviously, as I mentioned to Mr. Norton, the recommendation does make a number of does attempt to address, I think, a number of the issues that you've just raised as conditions of the lease. And so it's up to council tonight to make a decision on that recommendation. But I think that some of the things that you've raised are probably addressed in those 7 points within the capital management plan and the management plan. And obviously there's state and federal regulatory bodies that are required to obviously enforce the animal welfare standards as well. But I think that was probably a comment, so we can take that on board as a comment.
I'd just like to point out that also I had a question to Deputy Prime Minister Barnaby Joyce just recently, and he has committed to me, and you were there too, that he will build a new sale yards in the southwest of Western Australia. If he's, I assume he'd have to be re-elected, but hopefully that's the case. I don't think he'll do it before the election.
Thank you, Melvin. So,
Right.
yes, obviously we were both there.
So
and
he's
that
given us that commitment.
Yep. So we were obviously both there, Melvin, and I have brought back to council as well those comments that Mr. Joyce made on the day, as potentially an avenue of discussion to have around the future of the sale yards. But unless you've got a question, I think
Sorry,
you'll have to leave your comments there. Thank you, Melvin.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Harnett. Is there any further questions? Yes, please. Please state your name and locality for the record.
Dr. Don Finlay, veterinarian, Chilwarp, Bunbury, Southwest. Thank you, Council. I always like to know who I'm asking a question to. Who are these two blokes? They don't have identifiers.
Oh, sure. They're Shire staff. They're acting directors for the infrastructure and development and for community and corporate.
Oh, infrastructure. Does that include the Boynup sales yards?
The
That's a
development would be
question.
assessed through there. Yep.
That's a question. Yeah.
Any planning developments will go through the Directorate of Infrastructure and Development. Yes.
Okay. So question one to council is what would, and this yards is like a rubber ball in Cabana Bay with so many people involved and parties of interest that to focus on an issue such as animal welfare, which Mr. Norton and my previous mate here have said to, it is like constipation. So my question is, what do you feel as a council tonight, right now, is the main issue of welfare in those sales yards?
Thank you, Doctor, for the question. As I've mentioned earlier on, I do have an interest in that, so I'll have to ask the Deputy President to answer that question.
Yes, that's myself. Thank you. It's obviously a very difficult question for me to ask because you've asked for the views and considerations of all councillors around the table. Obviously, I just remind you that the recommendation is before council tonight, and it is for council to make those considerations and have that deliberation to occur at the time that had, well, there's been discussions, obviously, but I don't really know if that's so much a question.
It is a question, sir.
Yes, so it is a question to all councillors, and all I can respond to, all I can say in that response is that councillors are considering the item tonight, and as we've discussed earlier through previous questions, animal welfare and the welfare of the site is, animal welfare at the site is a deliberation for consideration tonight as part of the lease agreement.
Okay, thanks. All I can say quickly is an email was sent at 15:50 this afternoon from Teresa Sharp in Gillard regarding the yards. I have copies here. The number one issue, in my opinion, as a cattle veterinarian, is heat and heat reduction on standing cattle on 40-degree summer days. That was explicitly shown today. These yards have no sails or overhead shade for the buyers, the sellers, or the cattle. You walk up there and there's patches on everybody from skin cancer surgery over the last 30 years. Mount Barker has their sails up, Mouchet has their sails up, and by golly, you have it right in your hand here tonight to put the lever on the capital changes that need to be done. Or the public will decide later. It's your yards. It's Boynup sales yards in the Shire of Capel. You can say it's the Ag Department. You can say it's this, that, elders. Doesn't matter. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess I'll take that as a comment then, but as I've mentioned, council is considering the item tonight, and those capital improvements are a consideration of the recommendation that has been put forward to council, and until that decision's made, obviously I can't imply any way or that may go.
Thank you. Are there any further public questions? No? All right, we'll move on to applications for leave of absence. Councillor Towntroy is asking for a leave of absence for which month, Councillor? For the ordinary council meeting of February 23rd. Okay, so that's moved by yourself. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Clues. All right, we'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? And that's carried unanimous. Any further applications? No. Item 6, declarations of interest. Yes, thank you. We just have one tonight. That's for Councillor Kitchen in item 13.1, disposable property, Boynup Cattle Sale Yards, with an indirect financial interest that a person who I'm closely associated has a financial interest in the use of the sale yards. Item 7, notice of items to be discussed behind closed doors. We have one item tonight, item 20.1, the appointment of senior officers. Item 8, the confirmation of the minutes of the ordinary council meeting of the 15th of December. Is there a mover for that? Councillor McCleary. And a seconder, Councillor Dillon. Is there any discussion from the seconder? Nothing around the table? No. I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? Those against? That's carried unanimous. Item 9, announcements by the presiding person without discussion. There's just one, and that is that we have a late item tonight for consideration. Item 16.1, an application for temporary accommodation. Item 10, petitions, deputation and presentations. We have one presentation tonight. Councillor Mogg, you have a certificate to present.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have a certificate of appreciation presented to the Shire of Capel for your continued community support and sponsorship on behalf of the Jalorup Community Inc. for the Sundowner event in October last year. Thank you.
All right. Thank you to the Jalorup Community Inc. Motions of which previous notice has been given, there are none. Questions of which previous notice has been given, there are none. We move on to item 13.13, Chief Executive Officer reports.
Making a habit of this every month. The Shire President has declared an indirect financial interest and has had to leave the room regarding item 13.1. Item 13.1, Boynup Sale Yards, lease disposal. Do I have a mover? Councillor Noonan, and a seconder? Councillor Dillon. Councillor Noonan, would you like to take it away?
Thank you, Mr. Deputy President. I would like to move the motion with an amendment, please.
Yes, so you're technically moving an alternative motion. Do you have that alternative motion ready?
I can read it out for it to be...
Yes?
So,
Yep, so
in,
can you read your alternative motion that you're moving?
yeah, in item 2, where it's got the 7 conditions, if we add an 8th condition, and that 8th condition read that the lease is given subject to the installation of either shade sails or solid roofing
over all cattle pens no later than the 31st of October 2022.
All right, councillors, the motion has been moved like that, so it will not be debated as an amendment. It becomes the substantive motion, or the motion that is placed on the table. It's been moved by Councillor Noonan and seconded by Councillor Dillon. It is obviously on the board. Everyone's happy that they can see that. Well, yeah, so Councillor Dillon, as a seconder, do you agree with the motion that as it's different than what you may have intended to second?
Thank you, Deputy President. What I would say is that I was seconding the motion as presented, not necessarily with expecting an amendment.
Okay, so I take that as Councillor Dillon has withdrawn his second to the motion. Councillor Terentroy, you're seconding the motion? Okay, so the motion is now on the table. Councillor Noonan, would you like to speak to your motion?
Thank you, Mr. Deputy President. We've had, as we know, this has been around for a long time. It's been talked about. We called for public submissions. We've had 11 public submissions. Every single one of those public submissions was in favour of establishing a new sale yards in another location which could meet all of the animal welfare issues that are currently major problems with buoying up. We've had presentations or questions tonight from Mr. Mike Norton, from Melvin Hetier and from Dr. Don Finlay. All of them have highlighted the problems that the current site has, in particular with animal welfare. One of the critical issues that was outlined by Dr. Finlay earlier tonight was the problem of heat stress on cattle. So if it's 35 degrees up in the stands, it's at least 10 degrees hotter down in the pens, and if the cattle are fairly tightly packed, if they haven't got the ability to move to water, that heat stress is very detrimental to the cattle, to their condition, and it's important that we've had, it's not acceptable to say, well, the yards have been there and they've been that way for 50 years. That's the most ridiculous and rubbish argument that could ever be presented. So we have, it's 2022. We have to make it very clear to WALSA, to elders, to Nutrient Ag Solutions, that we expect the capital upgrade plan to not just be presented as it has to be before this lease can be signed. Okay, it must be presented. The completed plan must be presented before this lease can be signed, but that we expect in that commitment, in that capital upgrade plan, a commitment that they are going to take positive steps to improve the welfare of the cattle. And they could well say, oh yeah, we've got it, it's in the plan, we've done the plan, and we're planning to get around to it in about year 7 or year 8. And that would just be totally unacceptable. It would make the Capel Shire a laughing stock. It would potentially trigger legal responsibility for breaches in animal welfare that Capel Shire would have to address. It would be a red flag, an invitation to Peter and other such organisations to launch a major campaign targeting the buoying up cattle sale yards. And remember, they are the buoying up cattle sale yards. They belong to, it's Capel Shire. It's not it's not labelled anywhere as the Elders, Rural Services and Nutrient Ag Solution sale yards. It's the burn-up cattle sale yards. So we're the ones who, on a state and on a national front, we're the ones who bear the responsibility and who would be seen to be negligent in our treatment of these animals. So that's why I think we have to be adamant that the welfare of animals is addressed immediately upon the signing of that lease, and I think for it to be completed, you know, even if the sale shades are temporary, for them to be completed no later than the 31st of October, that still gives them 10 months, you know, 10 and a half months to get the design, get the application in. It puts the onus on the Shire to expedite any approvals that need to be done, and so that we'd never have another summer where there's a 40-degree day and a cattle sale with Black Angus cattle jammed into pens that can't move and that are suffering heat stress. Okay. Thank you, Mr. President. So I'd recommend the motion with that amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Noonan. The second to Councillor Terran-Troy. Did you have anything to add to discussion?
No, I think Councillor Noonan covered it all well. Thank you.
Just want to take the opportunity to ask a question just to the CEO regarding what the organisation's view is on the viability of that timeline.
Through you, Deputy Shire President, thank you, Councillor, for the recommended amendment. I think there's a couple of things that I'd bring to Council's attention in their consideration of that proposed amendment. One is that the lease agreement, subject to Council's decision tonight, wouldn't commence until the 1st of July 2022. We're currently operating under the existing lease, which runs to the 30th of June. So that would provide technically a period of 4 months. Taking into consideration that if the proposal from WELSA was to erect a substantial shade shelter, even if it was just shade, or if it was to be a solid roof, very likely would require the submission of a development application, which may also need to have a development application advertised, but certainly referred to other relevant agencies. So I would just suggest that that timeline would be next to impossible to achieve. I understand your intent in terms of having shade provided for in time for next summer. I think that's where you're coming from. But given what was required, given that the lease doesn't start until July, and the fact that very likely would trigger a development application.
Point of order.
Yes, Councillor Clues.
Apologies, Chair. We've had this discussion, and this is now a repeat of what a discussion we've already had. I believe we're going into the realms of making debate.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly. I've turned it off. I'm not sure exactly the point of order, but I obviously note that obviously any discussions that have been had before this meeting in briefings or whatnot, obviously don't prevent councillors from having those discussions again in the room. I've obviously asked the CEO a question. I think he's answered it sufficiently, so I'll cut it off there if that is preferable. But I think that the answer's been provided. Councillor Clues, you had your hand up to speak before I asked a question. Would you like to speak now?
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to move an amendment, please.
Yes, you're moving an amendment. State the amendment.
Thank you. So the next paragraph down, to the satisfaction of Shire officers. I'd like to make an addition of the words and to meet compliance with all current state and federal animal welfare legislation.
Is your amendment's correct? I just need to maybe have a look at the standing orders, because I think that it's may be repeating itself, because 2-I is subject to negotiation and management order with Walser that includes and not limited to the animal welfare legislation, regulations and standards. So that is a point of that is a point that is included in the management order. So I'll give you the opportunity to. Obviously, I haven't seeked a seconder yet.
I think you're right, Chair. Thank you.
No worries. I take it you withdraw the.
Thank you.
Withdraw the amendment.
No, I'll withdraw it. Thank you.
Withdraw it. Now, did you want to continue your discussion, or was?
Thank you. I think the only comments I wanted to make was that I'm disappointed that there isn't already some form of roofing over these facilities. It's been there for a long time. Animal welfare isn't a new thing.
Thank you, Councillor Clues. Do I have anyone else who? Councillor McCleary.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. Look, I've heard what Councillor Noonan said, and heard from the public and the question times there. There's a lot of things in this, and I'll point to there was some comments about to the satisfaction of the Shire officers. Shire officers have their resources where they can go to external bodies to help them make that decision, and I'm pretty sure you'll see it in the planning documents that we get. There's all this other feedback in it, and it helps them make the decision. So it's not just based on their skills. They engage with people that have the skills to make the proper assessment, which is what I'd expect of that process. Masks and breathing. Rightfully said in item 2, there's a whole lot of items there that pull in a whole lot of legislation that has to come into effect. So I think we're sort of doubling up on the amendment. I'm not too worried about having the amendment in there. It's the issue at the time frame that's going to have an impact. Even if there's probably some wins early to improve animal welfare, I think if we start putting in structures and what we need there, then we're getting into too much detail. We need to be focused on, yeah, look, item 1, animal welfare legislation, deal with that and get it sorted. Sorry. So I'm not supportive of the amendment in the aspect of a time frame in it, because under the current climate of being able to achieve those deadlines, it's pretty tight, and resourcing is really hard to get things. But I'd kind of like the process as we go forward that there's some impetus to the leasee to improve the facilities, as we're all agreeing, is that we need to have a better process in there, and then going forward the capital improvement maybe in the next year, but at least if we got to the first summer there was some physical improvements that were simple but not necessarily permanent that deal with the issue going forward. Other than that, I think we've been backed into this position over a number of years. Previously on council we were always pushing to try and get the sale yard somewhere else, and there's some background issues that are forcing our hand to be in this position, and I think this is the best outcome that we can get at this time, and I wholly recommend that we proceed with the officer's recommendation, not necessarily the time frame that you were requesting is that bill, but I understand why you were seeking it. That's all I had.
Thank you, Councillor McCleary. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak on the item? I will take the opportunity to speak. I'm going to begin by proposing an amendment, and that amendment is just to remove the words no later than the 31st of October 2022. I move that amendment. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Terran-Troy had her hand up first. Councillor Terran-Troy seconds that amendment. So, look, totally agree with the intent, and quite frankly, I don't think that there is any debate here tonight that we don't want to improve the standards for livestock and for people at the buoying up sale yards. I think Councillor McCleary said it quite well. This is obviously the best card we can play, hand of cards we can play with the situation that's been given to us, and it's been an incredibly difficult and challenging journey here. And it's quite interesting how much of a moving beast the sale yards issue is as well, because it was only 2 or 3 months ago where it was all about you know, the competition and whatnot and all that process, and now it's a real discussion about the livestock's well-being and the welfare standards that are at the site, and obviously the capital improvements that need to occur. I don't think there's any argument that against capital. I feel that it's agreed that capital improvements need to be made at the site. I don't think anyone's denying that. I 100% support that as well. I think the shade sales is the item, or the shading anyway, is that item that seems to come up quite often as a specific piece of infrastructure that can be done quite efficiently. I guess here, obviously, I'm just a little bit concerned about the timeline, because the motion that obviously we are considering tonight, these conditions begin from July, so there are some issues there. You know, I've heard if we had another 6 or so months, it would probably be more achievable, but again, it's to the staff's satisfaction, and the staff, I think we've made very clear through these discussions over time what our expectations are as a council as well. If staff aren't satisfied or think that they're being taken for a ride by Walser and they're not happy with the management order that they've got, then the management plan anyway, they will come back to council, I would hope, and have that discussion with us in an informal setting, or would it be? But apart from that, I think everything else is pretty well addressed in item 2. So I just want to remove the date. Because it wasn't an original amendment, it can just be amended, and it doesn't change, obviously, the intent of the original motion. So I'm speaking to the amendment. The second, Councillor Tarrant-Troy, did you have anything to add to that?
No, thank you.
Is there anyone else who'd like to speak to the amendment? Councillor Noonan?
Thank you, Mr. Deputy President. I would speak against that amendment, and I would foreshadow changing the wording if should this amendment fail. I'd foreshadow the changing of the date to the 31st of November 2022. And the reason I'd make that is because that then gives 11 months for them to put up sage shales, and the reason I say 11 months is because Walser does not have to sit on their hands until June or July. They absolutely do not have to do that. They know that this is a problem. They have known that it's a problem for the last 20 years. They've done nothing about it. By getting the planning underway and getting the plans in, getting them approved, and if we can expedite that, making an absolute priority with the planning staff here at the Shire, we are both making a very clear show of good faith and show of our intention that animal welfare has to be placed as a top priority. As Dr. Finlay said, what is your top priority? What's the key thing? You know, is it the amount of money that the Shire gets out of the rent? Is it the comfort of the buyers and sellers up in the stands? No. Is it the access to other agents? No. The key thing is animal welfare. That's the thing that, you know, that's the reason why this is listed under the risk assessments for the Shire by our officers as financial high, legislative compliance high, reputation high. Reputation high. So I'm happy to move it. As I say, I'll vote against taking out the date. I will foreshadow changing the date to the 31st of November to give Walser an extra month. And if you can't get plans in and a simple, even if it's a temporary shade sale up within 11 months, I'll come and do it. I'm happy to get out and contract and do it. I've put shade cloth over the chicken pen. I can do the buoying up sale yards, I reckon.
You might have to declare a financial interest if you're going to start a shade sale business. Seconder, who is the seconder to that amendment? Councillor Terran-Troy. We've gone through that. Is there anyone else who wished to speak to the amendment? Councillor Clues.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I agree with Councillor Noonan. I think there's no reason that I can possibly understand that they couldn't have something in place, even if it's temporary, by November. I certainly don't buy for a second that it's a case of, like, they're only going to find out in July when the contract starts that this exists. We're deciding it tonight. They'll know tonight, and they'll have from tonight when they understand that that's what we expect. And quite frankly, like I mentioned earlier, my level of disappointment that this hasn't already happened after all these years removes all sympathy that I have for them for being rushed to getting something done about it if they call 11 months rushed. So, yeah, I'm happy for the current one to fall, and I will be backing Councillor Noonan's foreshadowed motion.
Councillor McCleary.
I'm going to talk for the amendment, and I'm probably going to start with a question first.
Yep.
What happens when that date passes if we go to the proposed amendment and put a date on there? What happens when the date passes? What do we do?
So if the date passes and the condition hasn't been achieved, there is a potential for Walser to have defaulted on their conditions and on their lease. Now, obviously, if we have set, obviously there could be some mediation and there could be legal proceedings around that. And obviously we have to assess the risk of whether or not we set achievable targets or in good faith set reasonable targets for the lessee. And obviously that could have some legal ramifications.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. My concern with the whole process is if we get to that date and it's not done and then we get into a legal thing, will the cattle still be there and not be treated as welfare? So I don't know that it's, having a big enough stick or something like that. You kind of need to know up front that they've got an obligation to do something rather than setting a date and the will from them to actually do it, which is really hard. I know that is the case. I'm not going to support a date. I think we just need to work hard to fixing the issue all the way along, and the officers will be aware that that's our wish, and we try and work to that rather than asking them as soon as we sign this lease, well, what's your plan? When you're going to get this? And bring that back to us so we understand what the process is. But I'm not going to set a date. I think we go with the amendment as that's on the table at the moment.
Thank you, Councillor McCleary. Was there anyone else who wished to speak to the amendment? No? I guess just as the mover, and I guess just to wrap up discussion on the amendment, as I sort of alluded to, obviously if there was a date and it wasn't achieved within that date for a number of reasons, I think the CEO has spoken obviously about the lengthy process that there is for development applications, which is probably the biggest concern. Obviously it could cause them to default on their lease. Now, if they feel that at any point that the lease has been geared in a way that's obviously unfair to them, or unachievable expectations have been set on them, I guess we know Walser a little too well to know what that could probably look like. There could obviously be some high risk, and Councillor Noonan obviously talked about those levels of risk. I think there is a high risk with setting a date. I feel that the consensus is that we all want to see those shade sales up. We all want to see the facilities improved, and quite frankly, that's why I didn't remove the whole lot, because I do want to clearly point out, obviously, that we really need to get them into gear about the shade sales. The date thing just makes it so tricky, particularly when we haven't had a conversation with Walsa about, by the way, when we're going to renew the lease, we're also going to throw in that we want those shade sales done basically ASAP. That preliminary discussion hasn't even occurred. So, however, yeah, obviously want to leave that in there as a really great direction to staff on what we're really looking for specifically within that management order and those capital improvement plans. But yeah, I won't be supporting the date, and so I obviously ask councillors for their support on the amendment to remove the date. Now, I will close debate on that and put it to a vote. Those in favour of the amendment? That is myself, Councillor Terran-Troy, Councillor McCleary, Councillor Dillon and Councillor Mogg. Did you put your hand down? Put your hand down. And those against? That is Councillor Clues, Councillor Noonan and Councillor Mogg. So the amendment is carried, 4-3. All right. So we come back to the substantive motion. I have to run through my head who's obviously already spoken, but do we have anyone who wishes to speak on the motion? Have you already spoken? You've already spoken. Sorry, Councillor McCleary. Councillor Dillon, you haven't spoken.
Thank you, Deputy President. Yeah, I'd like to pretty much echo what you've said, and also Councillor McCleary. There is no doubt that everyone here, and probably one who's absent, would want to see animal welfare at the forefront, but I think having a hard date for shade sales could be fraught with danger, and I'd just like to see it, happy to see it included in the motion, but yeah, happy to not see a date in there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dillon. Was there any other councillors who wish to add to discussion? Noonan, you have already spoken, but I will give you the right of reply when we get back to the end. Because you've already spoken, Councillor Noonan, you can't move an amendment, unfortunately. Councillor, have you spoken yet on the substantive motion? Okay, no worries. Councillor Terran-Troy.
I'm glad we had the discussion as a council, because putting that date in does make it difficult for them to meet the agreement. So, yes, thank you.
Turn my microphone off. This has been a really moving beast. It's developed, like I said, 3 months ago we were talking about completely different issues, and Dr. Finlay said to us, as we've heard reiterated tonight, you know, what is the issue at the forefront of what the council's doing tonight? And it's very clear to me that the issue at the front of all of our minds tonight is improving the welfare for the animals on the site that we have. And the discussion will always get thrown around, well, we need a, you know, obviously this site needs to be condemned and we need to move on to another site. But those things don't happen overnight, realistically. In fact, they don't happen in 5 years. They can happen in 10 years, but they can also take 20 years. So at the forefront of what we're doing tonight is the capital improvement of the sale yards that we have, the cards that we've been handed, and the relation and the lease that we'll be providing to Walsa. But I think the bit that we've really forgotten about tonight, amongst all this discussion, is about setting the vision for what the Shire is looking for in the next 10 to 20 years. And that's the part that I think we've really been trying to work towards for years now. And to see in there a commitment to commence a consultative process involving, you know, government, industry, everyone, to investigate the future viability of these sites and well, I think potentially, it basically really says in here, within the Shire but away from the Boyanup town site, I think is a fantastic step to finally have that somewhere within council's decision making, that we are committed to a vision to move these sites to a more suitable premises, is exactly where I've really always hoped we'd end up. And I 100% understand and sympathise with the conditions that are there at the moment and the fact that something really needs to be done. But unfortunately, we just can't do these things overnight. And what would be even worse than that is if we were to, not grant a lease and completely disrupt the cattle industry, completely disrupt our farmers in the southwest, and like Melvin Hefner said just earlier, from all over the Great Southern and the southwest and the Midwest and whatnot. This is our farmers' livelihoods, and when we play silly buggers with this lease, we're putting their livelihoods at stake. And the minister's made a very good point about that. And I think that we've come to a really good place with what we've got in front of us tonight that's going to make some really positive changes and give us a clear vision for what the next 10 to 20 years look like. So I'm obviously looking for all the council's support tonight to support the recommendation, including of course those shade sales, the topic of contention tonight. I'm glad that they're in there. I'm glad that we made that clear, and I look forward to staff having those conversations and negotiating. I think the vision's clear to them that they need to go in there and negotiate with Walser that these need to be a priority. They need to get done pretty quick, and going through that process with them to get those things done. So support the recommendation that Councillor Noonan's moved this evening, and I'm looking for Councillor's support. Do I have anyone else who wishes to speak on the item before I give it back to Councillor Noonan to close debate? No, Councillor Noonan.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy President. I am pleased that the installation of the sage shales has been highlighted, that it's certainly Walser will get I hope, the message that it's a priority from us. I'd point out that asking for compliance with legislation, with current legislation, animal welfare legislation, is not playing silly buggers. It's actually doing what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to make sure that things are done correctly. I would encourage Walser to, if this is passed, to take it on board that they need to recognise that we expect a show of good faith, and that we will, as we are showing good faith, we expect a show of good faith on their behalf, and that they get on to some of these improvements straight away, that they don't wait for, the signing of this lease, that they get the capital upgrade plan in as soon as possible, and that we actually get started on before the lease date. The final point I'd make is in relation to the Boyne community, which is something we haven't actually talked about tonight, and I acknowledge or recognise that the people in the Boyne community for the last 60 years have put up with dust and flies during summer, and excrement flowing through the waterways in the town for the last 60 years. It's fair to say that I think they've had their fair share, and that we also, in item 5.5, the commitment that's made there to identify and develop a long-term relocation solution, so still within the Shire, but away from the Boyne town site. Walser has to get that message also very, very clearly, that, at the end of 10 years, they shouldn't be thinking, or they've got to have a plan in place, or acknowledge that it's not going to be here in another 10. That they have to, and we have to, as a council, make sure that we have taken steps, and it talks about taking budgetary steps there, to ensure that that happens. So if that means that we have to develop a new reserve fund, and we have to start putting money away over the next 10 or 20 years to ensure that we can purchase a new block of land or make our contribution towards that, then that's what we have to do. And I think that message has to be loud and clear, not just to Walser, but also to every cattle producer, every agent, to the press, to the Minister, and certainly also to the people in the Boyanup community who have suffered long as a result of the present siting of the Boyanup sale yards. So I would like to commend that motion to the council.
Thank you, Councillor Noonan. I'll just quickly, just on a point of order 10.4, personal explanation, just the context of my use of the word silly buggers. That was in reference to if we weren't to grant a lease. I definitely do not think that we're playing silly buggers asking for animal welfare and regulation standards to be met. So just a personal explanation under 10.4 of the standing orders. Councillor Noonan has closed debate. I will put this item to the vote. All those in favour? That is myself, Councillor Terran-Troy, Councillor McCleary, Councillor Noonan, Councillor Dillon, Councillor Mogg, and those against? It's Councillor Clues. That item is carried. We will ask the Shire President to resume his seat.
Okay, item 13.2, the local government reform consultation, the Shire of Capel submission. I'd just like to remind councillors that there was a page that was distributed before, an additional point to 13.3, based on the discussions we had the other day. All right. Is there a mover for that recommendation? Councillor McCleary, and a seconder, Councillor Tarrant-Roy. Councillor McCleary.
Thank you, Mr. President. Welcome back to the chambers. There's not much really discussion. We've had a lot of input through the process. It's kind of an interesting change in the way the legislation is going to work. It seems like trying to force particular councils into a position that they weren't in before, whereas I think we're pretty safe in our processes that we do here.
Councillor Tarrant-Roy.
I'd just like to, through the chair, I'd just like to thank the staff and CEO for giving us out the amended page 8 of 48 to include additionally barring any exceptional circumstances or separate legislative regulatory provisions regarding confidentiality that the independently of both councillors and or persons bringing breach complaints against councillors be made public regardless of the outcome of the conduct panel findings. Thank you.
Is anyone to speak against the recommendation? Speakers for. Councillor Clues.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just want to thank staff actually for the workshops we did and the collaborative manner in which this document was put together. Actually, it was once again really nice to be involved in that process and be able to be given the time to have good, long, frank conversations about all this sort of thing before it comes to councils. Really good. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any speakers? Councillor Sciano.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, I did when local government reform or the paperwork that got released for this particular round of consultation came out. I'll be honest, I was quite nervous into the lead up to the announcement because you know, I've seen some of these things be a bit hit and miss. I think the first round of local government reform was a little bit hit and miss, and then the model code of conduct, and then the idea of, you know, a jury of your peers when it came to, you know, behavioural issues and stuff within council. But I was actually very pleasantly surprised with most of what was actually in the proposed reform that we've got from this new minister. And what also surprised me about that is that, you know, when Minister Templeman was first made Minister for Local Government, he invited me up to Dooma House, and we sat down and had a bit of a one-on-one chat about the space of local government, and you know what we needed to do. And the one thing I really talked to him about a lot was how we deal with behavioural issues within council. And interesting, a lot of that's really come through over the process, and that seems to be a really big focus of what's been presented in this reform. And the idea of having an independent assessor and stuff like that, I think, you know, could have some benefits, and everyone will always punch holes in any of these methods. Look, generally the paperwork, what we put together as a council in this stage, you know, there's some things that I'm a bar about, particularly this one, you know, publishing details on complaints that are found to not be substantiated or stuff like that. Yeah, pick your battles. The main thing for me, really, is the preferential voting. And I cannot emphasise enough how detrimental preferential voting would be to local government in Western Australia. I have seen the way that local governments have been politicised in the eastern states, and you know, of course, councillors, I think it's expected that if you're a politically motivated person, you might in your own time have a little bit of an allegiance to a party here and there and get a bit involved. There's no secret there. But you know, you've got to bring those things to you've got to come as a different person. So you could come to council as a councillor, right? But the preferential voting thing, what frightens me so much about that is the point that we all hate when we walk in, and though it happens, we hate when we walk in to a polling booth and there's someone like me standing there with a how to vote card trying to ram this down into your hand before you go in and vote. The worst thing that could happen is to see preference deals go on between council candidates. One, because it mirrors what we do in state government, and people are becoming quite disenfranchised with the state and the federal elections and what's going on there. But secondly, you know, imagine having a preconceived bias because I had preferenced someone else on my preference ticket because I, you know, needed to do a preference deal because everyone else was doing a preference deal. We could, if everyone didn't do a preference deal, it wouldn't matter. But as soon as one person does a preference deal, everyone's got to do a preference deal because that one person's got an advantage of trying to get people to vote the way they want and ultimately working the election a way that benefits them the most. So then we all do preference deals. I'd like to think that Capel, being the quiet little local government that we are most of the time, that, you know, that wouldn't really happen. But it's a risk. It's a really big risk. And, you know, you'd have preconceived biases that come onto council. You'd have commitments made before elections to other candidates, whether they got onto council or not onto council. You know, it would feel like a political election, like a party-type election. And I just really think with, you know, the love that I have for local government, one of the things I really love about it is the distance that we take from that political party component and the fact that this is not a government, this is not an opposition, this is a team of community-minded people who got here on their own campaigns, on their own back, to have a proactive input into the future of the local government. And I know people obviously, you know, work together and whatnot. You can't rule that out. But yeah, I think the preference deals, the environment that they're going to create is just going to be so counterproductive in what we do and what local government means. And I'm just really glad to take that stance on that. And I think from what I'm feeling, a lot of other local governments are feeling the same way. So I'm just hoping that message gets through the Minister clearly. But yeah, otherwise, I'm quite excited for some of the stuff that's in the reform. I don't exactly know why the reform needs to talk so much about driveway crossovers and why that's really important to the Local Government Act. But, you know, the Local Government Act is older than I am, and that's a problem. You know, that's a problem. So the fact that I think it's you know, Doug, you're about the same age as the Local Government Act. That's an issue. That's a real issue. So a real overhaul needs to happen, and I think that the minister that we've got at the moment seems to have a really good idea of what he's doing. You know, with a few tweaks that we can make and a few suggestions. So Thank you.
Thank you, councillor. Is there any further comments? No. Councillor McCleary, would you like to close debate?
I think I better make this one quick because it took so long, that last bit. But look, I think it's a good document that's been pulled together, and as pointed out by Councillor Clues, there's a lot of work in the background, a lot of input, and it was a nice process to work through. So yeah, look, I recommend this motion, and let's put it to the vote and clean it up.
Thank you, councillor. And with that, I will put it to the vote. Those in favour? And that's carried unanimous. Item 13.3, quarterly reporting for the Shire of Capel Corporate Business Plan 2021 to 2025. Is there a mover for that recommendation? Councillor McCleary, and a seconder. Councillor Mogg. Councillor McCleary.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, look, this is really good, really informative. We had a bit of a discussion. There's some things that aren't achieving, but it's a picture of where we're at. It's a good way moving forward. It's something to work with into the future. So yeah, look, I think it's great that the CEO has presented this to us, and I think I look forward to future updates where we're achieving a lot more of the tasks on there, and we've got a good plan forward.
Councillor Mogg.
Thank you, Mr. President. I concur with Councillor McCleary's sentiments, and that's it.
Is there anyone to speak against the motion? Speakers for? Any further speakers? Or just before I ask the mover to close, I suppose I'll just say a few words from the chair to thank to the staff for the first actual report we're getting on the corporate business plan, on our new corporate business plan, I should say. It's good to see this level of reporting that not only we see but the public actually sees, and we see those actions that we're hitting and where we're probably missing a few little things. But I think it's been a good result. A lot of teamwork's gone into this one, a lot of conversations over the last couple of months. So very glad to see this one. So. All right, I'll ask Councillor McCleary to close. No? All right, I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? And that's carried unanimous. All right. Infrastructure and Development reports. 14.1, deck and awning, lot 1086, Winter Court, Peppermint Grove Beach. This item was deferred at the December Ordinary Council meeting. And the motion was already moved by Councillor Tarantroy and seconded by Councillor Mogg. There were no speakers by the time that the motion was deferred. So, Councillor Tarantroy, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Just as read, thank you.
Councillor Mogg?
No, thank you.
Is there any speakers against the motion? Any other speakers for? No. Councillor Noonan?
Thanks, Mr. President. I'm going to speak for the motion, and I think that it's beholden on us as councillors to give some reflection or some comment on the recommendation and why we're supporting it rather than just leaving it as read. I believe that the items, some of the items are solvable. In fact, most of them are solvable. It would be possible to solve the issue of primary street setback. These things could be talked about. Reduced street surveillance. There are things that could be talked about. There are amendments that can be made which would make these plans compliant and completely remove that as an issue. Same with the septic. The real issue, or the main issue, the one that causes the major problem is the overlooking issue, and this is the one that's the key reason why I'm going to be voting to support this motion. you know, people have the right to expect privacy within their own property, you know, to be able to enjoy their property to the extent that it's possible, the privacy and comfort and all of that sort of stuff. This deck is large. It's at the front of the house. It does have, our staff have been out there and had a look at it, and it will have that overlooking problem in relation for the neighbours. Now, the neighbours' deck is nowhere near as high as this one's. Other houses in the vicinity that have built closer to the road have tended to be more single-storey garages. It's very clear, the design principles in the residential design codes that provide for visual privacy for adjoining properties, and unless there is some amendment made to the application which guarantees that privacy or that screening for the neighbours, then, you know, I fully support, and that amendment or that change in the application is brought to the council officers and the council officers are happy with it, then there's not an issue. But until such time as that happens, then I can't support any variation to the recommendation that our officers have made.
Any further councillors wishing to speak? Councillor Tarrantroy, I'll ask you to close.
Over the last 2 months, I've spoken to Mr. Charles Pace on 5 occasions. I've also had an email from him and also an email from one of his work colleagues, or one of the people who work for him, sorry. We discussed a lot of things, and he's aware that that if he needs to resubmit his application in future, he may do that. Thank you very much.
Okay, I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? And that's carried unanimous. Item 14.2, mosquito management, community consultation and information. Is there a mover? Councillor Clues. Seconder?
Chair, I'd like to move it with a slight modification, if you don't mind.
Yes. Please state your...
I'm now having trouble finding there's a... I've got the wrong one, it's the next motion. It's the next item.
Okay, so you're moving as read? Or
That's communication.
item 14.2?
Yes, thank you.
Yep. Okay. And that was seconded, Councillor Mogg. Councillor Clues?
Nothing for me, it's just great to see this come to us. It's obviously come from the special electors meeting. It's been a hot topic in the Shire for a long time, so yeah, looking forward to getting on with it.
Councillor Mogg?
Thank you, Mr. President. Yes, I also agree, share sentiments as Councillor Clues. It's great this has come forward, and I also support the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Is there any speakers against the motion? Speakers for? Councillor McCleary?
Thank you, Mr. President. Look, this is a great outcome from for the community. The staff have done a lot of work, and as put into the motions, there's going to be a lot more information provided to the community that will help them with understanding the mosquitoes and the issues. So I think it's a good way forward. There might be some changes along the way, but great motion.
Are there any councillors wishing to speak? Councillor Tarrantroy?
Speaking for the motion, so yes, I agree with Councillor McCleary. The Shire staff and CEO have done a lot of work on this, and they've shared information with us, and this idea of sharing more information with residents so that they can make more informed choices and have the knowledge to know why the decisions were made by council and staff. Thank you.
Any further councillors wishing to speak to the item? No. Councillor Clues, do you wish to? No. I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? That's carried unanimous. Item 14.3, Mosquito Management Development of Community Committee. Is there a mover? Councillor Clues?
Thank you, Chair. This is the one I'll move with an adjustment.
Yes. Could you please state your
So,
amendment?
for recommendation number 3, that be deleted and instead read supports the formation of a mosquito management community consultative committee as soon as is practicable. Yes, supports the need to form a mosquito management community consultative committee as soon as is practicable.
Are you happy with that wording up on the screen, councillor? Is there a mover for that? Seconder, sorry. Councillor Mogg. Councillor Clues.
Thank you. Yes, again, this has come from the special electors meeting, and to speak, I guess, mostly to my adjustment of the recommendation. I think it was very, very clear from that meeting and from speaking to the residents, they don't want to be told in 12 months' time what we've decided they're going to be hearing from us. They want to be part of the process of what information is available, how is the best way for the Shire to get that across to people, and these are the sorts of things that we're talking about in this item. So this is something the community is screaming at us to be involved with, and they have a group of people that want to come and get involved with this sort of thing. So I think it's beholden on us to offer them that option and that opportunity. So obviously I'd like to see this happen as soon as possible so that these residents can come along and actually help us set up what it is that they want. It makes no sense for us to dictate to them what they want. I think we need to hear from them and we need their involvement in that process. So that's the reasoning for that.
Councillor Mogg.
Thank you, Mr. President. I also concur with Councillor Khoo's sentiments. I was at that electors meeting. I've communicated with many community people, and I also think community consultation, communication and involvement is highly important, and thank you.
Thank you, councillor. Is anyone to speak against the alternative? Councillor Tarantroy.
Just regarding, sorry, through the chair, just regarding the wording, does Councillor Clues mean practical? As soon as is practical? Okay, thank you.
Is that's it? Yep. Right. Councillor McCleary.
Thank you, Mr. President. Not essentially talking against, just the way it's going to work, because if you read item 2 and then read the amended item 3, they contradict each other. One says item 1 might mitigate the need to establish a mosquito community, and then you're saying, and we want a community. So it's one or the other.
Okay. The mover and seconded by consent can just agree to that being removed as part of the amendment.
No, I disagree. I think parts 1 and 2 are noting things that are worth noting. We can remove number 2 if anyone wishes to move that amendment, but it's not necessary. It only says it may mitigate, doesn't say it will. I'm happy to leave it unless anyone else wants to pull it out.
Okay. Right, are there any speakers for or against? Councillor Noonan?
Thanks, Mr. President. I'd also speak in favour of the motion and also of Councillor Cluse's amendment. As Councillor Mogg stated, it's important to, and Cluse, of course, it's important to include the community, involve them in this consultative process. And I'd make the point, Councillor Mogg said that it was, to give them more information, but it also, what it does is it helps to temper any expectations that the community will have, or does have. There's a perception in the community that we're sitting on mountains of information and data, and we know everything. And our Shire officers know all there is to know about government reports, and that they come out daily, or, the health department, we get updates, 2 or 3 times a week. And so for people to realise that that's just simply not the case, and that a lot of the information, or that the information that is available, yes, it might take a month or more for it to get out, but that's because that's the time frame that it takes for the government to the health department to get that information, to process it, to put it into the systems, and then for them to release it. And then when we get it, we release it as soon as we can. So I think I think it's important to start this community consultative committee as soon as possible, so that as soon as possible they can realise that they're getting all the information that we can give them as soon as we can, because that's the time frame that we get that information in as well. And I think that would help the whole process. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Dillon?
Thank you, Mr. President. The way I read this agenda in 14.2 and 14.3, 14.2 was about improving our communication with our residents, and that's why I think it got through. 14.3 I thought was more or less something to work towards if the community felt that our information flow wasn't sufficient. Now, I don't think the amendment is a bad idea, but I sort of thought it was more an adjunct to 14.2, which was about us lifting our game, perhaps, getting out information out to our residents who are affected by mosquito. And I thought this was, like I say, the next step in that plan. I don't think it's a bad idea with the amendment to move straight to a consultative committee, but ultimately it's sort of counterfeiting 14.2 as I read it. Just my thoughts. Thank you, Mr. President.
Any further speakers? Councillor Tarantroy?
Yes, I agree with Councillor Dillon on everything he said. As I said, I don't believe it's a bad thing to have a community committee consulting, but it does seem to be not needed. That's what, yeah. Thank you.
Anything further? I suppose I'll just say a few things if I can. I was umming and ahhing about this recommendation over the last few days because I like the idea of a committee. But I also understand that, in us improving the way that we are informing the public about our mosquito activities, it might, in some cases, negate this. So I actually will probably support this motion because we can establish a committee, but it doesn't need to be a standing committee. It might only be actually running for a year. The public might say, this is what we want, and that's it. That might mitigate the need. So I think we could just set it up for a bit of formation, see what the public is directly seeking off this committee, and then it might no longer be relevant in a year's time. So All right, is there any further speakers? Councillor Clues, would you like to close?
Thank you, Chair. And yes, I had some notes here that were along the lines of your comments as well. I can't think of a better thing to do for us that wants to communicate better, to find out how to do that, than to have a community of the people that we're trying to communicate with inform us on how and when and why they want what they want. So I think it makes ultimate sense. And of course, you know, we're worried about the committee may agree that point number 2 here, the committee may agree, the committee may decide that actually we've mitigated our requirement and we're no longer needed. That might be very quickly, it might be in 12 months' time, but it's no problem. It's not the end of the world if they decide they don't want to be a committee anymore. But in the meantime, there'll be a great source of support for us to move forward on the issue, so look forward to it.
All right, well, I'll put that one to the vote. Those in favour? Those against? That's carried 7-1. Councillor McCleary against. It was moved with amendment. All right. 14.4, mosquito management, muddy lakes and mosquito management plan. Is there a mover for that recommendation? Councillor Tarantroy. Is there a seconder? Councillor Mogg. Councillor Tarantroy.
As the officer's recommendation says, it's an, one, the Shire of Capel Mosquito Management Plan, Attachment 1 to this agenda, dated the 10th of January 2022, be endorsed and formally submitted to the Department of Health. And 2, that the Council seek feedback from the Muddy Lakes Working Party on the progress and what information can be shared with directly affected residents, stakeholder groups and the broad community. I've got nothing further to add. It's quite clear.
Councillor Mogg.
Thank you, Mr. President. I also support this motion highly and thank the officer's recommendation. I think the Muddy Lakes was a contentious issue, and having the Department of Health and the Muddy Lakes Working Party group will be an extra help and support for the mosquito issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Is anyone to speak against the motion? Speakers for? Nothing. Councillor Tarantroy, would you like to close? No. I'll put that one to the vote then. Those in favour? And that's carried unanimous. All right, item 15, Community and Corporate Reports. 15.1, New Policy Adoption, Financial Reserves. The recommendation goes over quite a few pages, so please be aware. Is there a mover for that? Councillor McCleary. Is there a seconder? Councillor Dillon. Councillor McCleary.
Thank you, Mr. President. Look, this is a great lot of work in getting a policy together on how we're going to manage the financial reserves. This is a good strategic plan. It's associated with great financial benefits moving forward, and it's a bit like saving up for the house. You put things beside to get the deposit up and get into the process of that. So it's good management practices, and it'll work forward in our budgetary setting over the coming months.
Councillor Dillon.
Nothing further, Mr. President. Thank you.
Is there any speakers against the motion? Speakers for? Any speakers? Councillor McCleary, would you like to close? No. I'll put that one to the vote then. Those in favour? And that's carried unanimous. 15.2, New Policy Adoption, Borrowing Management. Again, this recommendation goes over quite a few pages. Is there a mover for that? Councillor Tarantroy. Seconder? Councillor McCleary. Councillor Tarantroy.
I think in a competitive world, and for our Shire to be able to move on, the officer's recommendation about borrowing management to be adopted is fantastic. The points about new borrowing for the purpose of capital works, and only if the annual debt is serviceable and affordable and part of the annual budget. Also, it talks about to maintain a debt service cover ratio in alignment with the benchmark of the Department of Local Government, Sport and Cultural Industries. The other good thing that I thought was really fantastic was that it has the annual loan borrowing program, and the CEO has the authority to accept loan offers on behalf of the council, subject to the borrowing amount being previously approved by council. So this actually gives our CEO a lot of scope to get the best rate and the best loan. Thank you.
Councillor McCleary.
Thank you, Mr. President. One of the key things I picked up was the internal loans. I thought that was a good establishment in this one, where it means we actually don't go out to a third party. We manage the reserves a little bit differently. I was intrigued with that. So, yeah, it's good to see, and then we build them back up again. So, yeah, look, great set of policies here.
Is there a speaker against the motion? Any other speakers? Councillor Tarantroy, do you wish to? Nope. I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? And that's carried unanimous. 15.3, accounts paid during the month of December 2021. Is there a mover for that? Councillor Tarantroy. Is there a seconder? Councillor McCleary. Councillor Tarantroy.
Accept the motion as read. And I'd just like to point out that I really understand the amount of work that's got into this, and I appreciate the work of the staff involved and the CEO and the senior management team.
Councillor McCleary, nothing. Councillor Clues.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question. I apologise. I should have asked earlier, but we were tight on time. Didn't get this far. There's two payments to GHD that seem to be for the same work. I assume that's not the case.
What's the EFT number, sorry?
EFT 38093 and 38289. The same operator with the same comment for what the cost was for.
So what were the numbers again, Councillor?
EFT 38093 and 38289. Page 71 and 80. They're both the very top items on those pages.
Do you, the CEO will make comment.
Thank you, Chair, and I might defer to the Manager of Finance. I might just suggest that given the amounts are different, quite often we take contracts where there's an initial sort of, 40% payment, then on completion of a further amount of work there's another 20% payment, so I'd suggest that that's just periodical payments throughout our contract of engagement, unless Andrew's got anything more to contribute.
Great, thank you very much. I just wanted to ensure it wasn't, separate charges for Capel and Harewoods, whilst they're both, all good. But that does, my next question on it though is, will we see those reports?
Does it know? We'll take that one on notice. And
thank you. All
right, is there any further discussion? Councillor Tarantroy, do you have to close? No? I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? That's carried unanimous. All right, 15.4, the financial statements for the 30th of November 2021. Is there a mover for those? Councillor McCleary. Seconder, Councillor Dillon. Councillor McCleary. Nothing. Councillor Dillon, nothing. Councillor Clues.
Thank you, Chair. A question again on page 89, the graph for rates and services in arrear. It seems that this year is significantly higher than the previous. I'm just wondering if we could get a brief explanation on what might be causing that.
Sure. The Acting Director of Community and Corporate.
Oh, the flat one.
Through you, Mr. President, it may be a delay in the time that rates were issued, but I'd have to take the question on notice and just check with our rates officer if that is the exact reason and get back to council.
Thank you, Director. With that,
Thank you.
Yep. Anything further? Councillor Noonan.
Thank you, Mr. President. A directly related question through the Chair to the Director of Finance and Corporate. At the bottom of page 88, the graph of debtors outstanding, if you just look at the November in the 3 successive years there, we see debtors have increased from around about 10,000 in November 2019 through to around about 40,000 in November 2020, and November 2021 probably looking at about 80,000 in debtors outstanding, people who haven't paid or been able to pay their rates. So perhaps if you would like to take that on notice, and because I'm sure it's related to the previous question as well.
The Acting Director of Community and Corporate Services.
Yep. Just that the debtors outstanding shown on that graph, the $80,000, it relates to sundry debtors, so it excludes any of the rates debt. I'd have to take the question on notice on exactly what makes up that 90 over 90 days, which is the largest proportion there.
Thank you, Director. Any further discussion? No? Councillor McCleary.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, look, you've got to be pretty careful where we're looking at rates and debts, and there's lots of different reports in here, so I appreciate the input that we've got there. There's going to be some answers to all these sorts of things. There's lots of things happening out in this COVID world that we don't know the reasons, and so we just need to be careful going forward, but the recommendation is pretty good. Just, I don't think there's anything that we needed to follow up on that one.
All right, well, I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? That's carried unanimous. Right. Item 16, new business of an urgent nature. We do have one item. 16.1, the application for a temporary accommodation on a building site. There are two recommendations there that we will deal with separately. The first one being that Council approve the consideration of the new business of an urgent nature. So I'll ask for a mover for that. Councillor Noonan. And a seconder. Both Councillor Tarantroy. Councillor Noonan.
Can I move a procedural motion, please, for a 5-minute adjournment?
Just to clarify, Councillor, what are you seeking the adjournment for?
Just so I can read this document that we've
Okay.
been handed.
Well, we can just suspend standing orders, and then through the chair, I can just allow that time then.
Fantastic, I'm happy
All
with
right.
that.
So before I do that, I just need to get the seconder, which is Councillor Tarantroy. Did you have any? No? All right. Well, through the chair, then I'll move that we suspend standing orders 10.1 and 10.2. All right. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Clues. We'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? It's carried unanimous. All right. I won't call any further speakers now that I don't have to, so please take your time to read.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to proceed when you are.
Is nobody else reading? No? Okay, all right. Well, I'll move that we reinstate Standing Order 10.1 and 10.2. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Clues. All those in favour? That's carried unanimous. Okay. Is there anyone to speak against consideration of the new business? Any speakers for it at all? Councillor Tarantroy? Just for clarity, this motion is just to consider the new business. Okay. Councillor Nathan, do you wish to sum up? Nope. Yeah, but I've just got to follow the. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, I think this is a fairly urgent, I can understand it's an urgent item. We only received the information yesterday, but it means a great deal to the Capel, the Shire resident who brought the motion to her and to her family. I think we should. Okay. I think we should absolutely proceed.
Right. I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? That's carried unanimous. All right. Recommendation 16.2. Is there a mover? Councillor Clues. Seconder, Councillor Noonan. Councillor Clues.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Noonan. I will move it with an amendment. I've got a couple of options. I think perhaps if we move it, so the first paragraph there says 31st of April 2022. I think I'll amend April to May. The reason...
Seeing as it had already been seconded, we'll just have to get the consent of the seconder for that. Yep, okay. Councillor Clues.
Thank you. Yeah, a couple of reasons for that. One, obviously there isn't 31 days in April, so that made that an issue. But I think probably it wouldn't hurt to put another month on there anyway. I'm actually, I would have liked to have seen this behind closed doors, to be honest, because it seems like quite a personal issue for the resident, but I'm glad we now anyway have the support of the staff's officer's recommendation to help out this resident, and I strongly hope the rest of the council agrees that we allow this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Noonan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, I concur with Councillor Clues and nothing more to add.
Are there any speakers against the motion? Speakers for? Councillor Dillon.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, look, I'm happy to see this motion go through. I think we need to be seen as an empathetic council. I think there's some fairly stringent conditions there on the applicant anyway. So, assuming all those boxes are ticked, I can't see why we can't help someone out. And bearing in mind, of course, there's a lot of hold-ups with the building industry, as myself and my wife have discovered over the last 12 months or so. So, no, it's a good motion. I think we should support it.
Any other speakers? Councillor Tarantroy.
Through the chair, I just wanted to note that in accepting this urgent matter or urgent motion, it's actually giving the Shire showing compassion towards our residents, and I think that's a very valuable thing because everyone faces difficult times, especially now with building supply delays and also with all the uncertainty with COVID. Thank you, and I'd like to thank the CEO and the staff for doing this. Thank you.
Councillor Ciano.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a quick comment. Obviously, very supportive of the motion that we have in front of us, of course. You know, I obviously wish them all well with moving to the Shire and building their dream home and sending their children to school in the region. I just think it's worth noting that probably something we could consider as a delegated authority in the future, you know, just so that staff and the CEO can make these decisions without them needing to come to council. So I think worth a comment there. Thanks.
Any further speakers? Councillor McCleary.
It's going to be a bit of a question. If you go to the statutory environment, camping other than a caravan park or camping ground, for a period specified in the approval which is longer than 3 nights, and then it says the land can be camped on for longer than 3 months in any period of 12 months. So now, if we're doing the change, are we exceeding the 3 months and then outside the legislation, which then pushes it up to the minister, I believe? We're in January 4th. We might just make it. We can't do the end of May. So we have to just say a period of 3 months from this approval. Might be the better amendment. Otherwise, we can't approve it.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, you are correct. It could be amended to state that the approval is given up to 3 months from the decision of council, to 3 months from now. If there is a movement.
Does that work, or are we in a different? Sorry.
Sorry? Yeah, that works. All right. We'll need to change that motion then. Councillor Clues.
So I'll just point out that this doesn't have a start date. When the resident wishes to utilise what we've allowed is entirely up to her.
Hang on, Councillor. Okay. Okay, just a couple of comments from May. The applicant has indicated that their children wish to begin school in the district in about a fortnight, and they also have indicated that permanent residence is scheduled for completion by the 24th. So I'd say they're seeking that temporary accommodation approval sooner rather than later in the year. Does council feel it needs to have a bit more of a discussion about it? Otherwise, I'll be seeking someone to amend that condition. All right, considering I'm the actual only one who hasn't spoken formally, including Councillor Mogg, I'll move that an amendment that after the words Stratham, we include 3 months from the date of issue of the written approval, and delete all words after that to point A. Okay, is there a seconder for that, Councillor Mogg? Pretty straightforward from me, so Councillor Mogg, do you wish to comment?
Thank you, Mr. President. I think that tidies up the motion and is fair. Thank you.
Councillor Clues.
Thank you. Look, all we're being asked to do is allow something within our statutory power. We're not being asked if we will agree to go beyond what is legislatively available to us. And I think there is no harm done whatsoever with permitting her to be there for 6 months out of the year and have it ending in next year, in 10 years. She still will have to abide by legislation. It makes no difference whatsoever. All I'm doing with my original amendment is offering her the flexibility to decide when that will be. And I think it makes much more sense. We shouldn't be dictating when she should start and finish within the only available 3-month window. She'll know that she's got a 3-month window. Let her figure what days are best for her.
Are there any further speakers? Councillor Noonan.
Thank you, Mr. President. I suppose we want to do the right thing by Ms. Larson, and so if we give her 3 months to finish, and if she has problems getting the plasterers in and the tilers in and that sort of thing, in 3 months' time we'll just be back here again, and we can give her another 3 months. This is not a difficult thing, and so I think your amendment is sensible. I agree with Councillor Ciano that this could be delegated as well. And the point that Councillor Terrantroy makes, that we have to be a council, a shire that facilitates and enables and encourages and is empathetic and all that we solve problems, that we don't create problems for people.
Sure. Any Councillor Clues?
Thank you. Question through the chair. Will the date of issue, will that be ensured to be on the day or after the day the resident has taken up residency, I suppose?
Sorry, I don't understand your question.
We're being asked to give 3 months specifically and exactly from specifically and exactly the date of written approval being received. Can we or will we ensure that that start date is the date that the resident intends to walk in the door on this property?
The CEO will answer that one for you.
Through you, Shire President, yes, we can consult with the applicant and make sure that the date of written approval commences by agreement when they'd like it to.
Thank you.
I speak on the amendment.
No, okay. All right, Councillor Sciano.
To throw a spanner in the mix, and this is what happens when, unfortunately, no matter how simple it is, a matter of urgent business. Point C of the statutory environment says, despite paragraph B, by the local government of the district where the land is situated, if such an approval will not result in the land being camped on for longer than 12 consecutive months, and 2, if the person has the legal right to occupy the land. So we can actually give them, because they own the land, I presume, I'm making that assumption, we can actually give them up to 12 consecutive months as a local government. So I'd like can I ask if a staff member could confirm that, or the acting director could confirm that is a correct interpretation of the statutory environment?
Does it work? Oh, yeah. Oh, okay. Amazing. The interpretation of the Deputy President is correct. However, the complicating factor that we have in this particular case and in relation to all of the approval for this is that we do not know at this point in time whether the applicant can deliver all or any of the conditional requirements. So we're not sure whether the land has septic on it. We're not sure whether she's got power and water. We're not sure whether whether it's actually occupiable under any circumstances. All what we have needed to be able to do was to be able to give this person an answer one way or the other, whether it's even potentially possible for her to do what she needs to do. As to the term, yes, we could potentially go for 12 months if the title has moved across, which we also don't know.
So, all right. Look, if I can continue discussion, I guess, from that question. I am not going to support the amendment because I get what Councillor Clues is trying to do here, just give an extra month of breathing room. I think it's a fair assumption to presume that if they're building their home on property that they are trying to occupy now, obviously they're in a troublesome situation. It's very unfortunate. I think it's obviously low. The conditions for ablutions and all that are there anyway, but I don't think we're restricted by this 3-month window, so let's give it through to the end of May. The 31st of May, I think, was what the original motion was. I'm just happy to go back to that. And obviously, it actually gives us the ability to review that in the 31st of May anyway. So it doesn't matter. Well, it doesn't matter about the start as long as between now and the end of May there's not 12 months. Then it could start today. It could start next week. But anyway, just obviously a bit of a glitch in trying to make decisions. Late items. But yeah, I suggest that we reject the amendment and just stick back to the May date that Councillor Clues has attempted to present to Council, and hopefully, hopefully everything's all good by May, and I wish them the best of luck.
Okay, are there any further speakers on the amendment? No? All right. Well, I was the mover. I won't sum it up. Put that to the vote. Those in favour of the amendment? No, the amendment is that it's a 3-month approval from the date issue of written approval. Is everyone clear? All right. Put that to the vote. Those in favour? Those against? That's carried 5-4. Did you get 5-3? Sorry. All right, and that becomes the substantive motion. Are there any further speakers to this? All right, hang on, just wait a second. Yep. Okay, the amendment becomes the substantive motion. Are there any further speakers to the item? And Councillor Clues, would you like to close debate?
I think I have to support this motion because I just desperately would want to help this person out in the position they're in. I'm a bit stunned that we've put restrictions on her that we weren't required to, but I guess it is what it is now. So we put the motion.
All right, those in favour? And that's carried unanimous. All right, thank you, for your diligence on that item, councillors. Public question time. Do we have any questions from the public? No. Is there any motions without notice? No. Is there any motions for consideration at the next ordinary meeting of the council? No. Item 20, items for consideration.
Hello, Mr. President. I would like to foreshadow that the next council meeting, I would like to introduce a motion authorising the CEO to investigate the implementation of a citizen science program in relation to mosquito monitoring. I'll give the CEO detail, the exact wording of the motion between now and then.
Okay, we'll just wait for that to be...
Oh, okay, hold on.
Oh, you have it? All right. All right, we've got that on record then. Item 20, items for consideration behind closed doors. We do have one item there, and so we will go behind closed doors for the consideration of that item. I will move that the council goes behind closed doors. That's seconded, Councillor Clues. All those in favour? That's carried unanimous. Just a moment, councillor. Sorry. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. And it being 10 to 9, I will declare the January meeting of Council closed.